Erev Tov Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Maaser Sheni. We're up to Perek Gimel Mishna Yud. Today's Mishna Yud should be Leil Mishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbai, Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Michael ben Ananit, and Yosef ben Angelo Mataev. Ruach Hashem Tinechenem Began Eden. In yesterday's Mishnah, we learned that Maaser Sheni produce that became Tameh may be redeemed in Yerushalayim. Today's Mishnah is going to cite a machloket about whether this is also true if food that was bought with Maaser Sheni money became Tameh in Yerushalayim. We know in general, food bought with Maaser Sheni money has the same status as Maaser Sheni produce. So as long as the purchased food is tahor, it may not be redeemed in Yerushalayim, just like Maaser Sheni produce may not be redeemed in Yerushalayim. But if the purchased food became Tameh, that's a machloket. What is to be done with it? And that is today's Mishnah. Halakuach bechesef Maaser Sheni shenitma yipadeh. If food bought with Maaser Sheni money became Tameh, it may be redeemed even in Yerushalayim, just as actual Maaser Sheni may be redeemed when Tameh. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, but Rabbi Yehuda says it may not be redeemed, rather yikaver, it must be buried. And the Mefarshim explain, according to Rabbi Yehuda, once Maaser Sheni funds have been used to buy food, the Maaser Sheni sanctity may not be transferred another time. And the Rav explains that the Torah says the Maaser Sheni produce may be redeemed for money, and that money used to buy food, once that has been done, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the mitzvah has been completed, and the Torah does not allow for the sanctity to be transferred another time, and therefore if the food cannot be eaten because it is tameh, it must be buried. And again, since the food cannot be eaten because it's tameh, nor may you redeem it, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it is of no use at all, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda is afraid that if you were to simply leave it to rot, someone might accidentally eat it. So to prevent this, the Chachamim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, decreed that it must be buried. Now, Amru lo Rabbi Yehuda, the Chachamim, the Tana Kama, challenged Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda, it is logical to say that the purchased food may be redeemed if it becomes tameh. Why? A logical inference. Uma im Maaser Sheni atzmo shenitma arei hu nifdeh. If actual Maaser Sheni that became tameh may be redeemed, like we learned in yesterday's Mishnah, halakuach bechesed Maaser Sheni shenitma eno din sheyipadeh. Is it not logical that if food bought with Maaser Sheni money became tameh, it may be redeemed? Meaning, it makes sense to say that actual Maaser Sheni produce has stricter laws than food that got its sanctity by being bought with money on which such produce was redeemed. Since the actual produce may be redeemed if tameh, is it not logical that the purchased food may be redeemed if tameh? Amar lem, Rabbi Yehuda said to them, lo, that is not a valid argument. Im amartem b'Maaser Sheni atzmo. Although you say that actual Maaser Sheni may be redeemed when it is tameh, it also has another leniency with regard to its redemption. Shekenu nifdeh batao b'chuk makom. That it may be redeemed when it is ta'or if it is at a distance from the place, meaning before it arrives in Yerushalayim. Like we learned in Mishnah, chapter 1, Mishnah 5, that the place refers to Yerushalayim. Tomru b'lakuach b'chesed Maaser she'enu nifdeh batao b'chuk makom. Will you say that the same halacha applies to food that was bought with Maaser Sheni money, which does not have this leniency, meaning it may not be redeemed when it is ta'or if it is at a distance from the place, because the Mefarshim explain, like we learned in chapter 1, Mishnah 5, Maaser Sheni funds may not be spent on food outside Yerushalayim, but only in Yerushalayim. So we see, with regards to redeeming food for money, Maaser Sheni produce is treated more leniently. Produce may be exchanged for money outside Yerushalayim, but food bought with such money may be purchased only in Yerushalayim. So we see that, in other words, with regards to redemption, Maaser Sheni produce is in fact treated more leniently than food purchased with Maaser Sheni funds. Therefore, it's likely, Rabbi Yehuda says, that here too, with regards to redeeming Tameh Maaser Sheni in Yerushalayim, Maaser Sheni produce is treated more leniently, that you can redeem it, than food purchased with Maaser Sheni funds. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot redeem it. And the Rav tells us, Ven Rabbi Yehuda, the Halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, the Halacha follows the opinion of the Tana Kama, that if food bought with Maaser Sheni money became tameh, it may be redeemed even in Yerushalayim, just like actual Maaser Sheni may be redeemed when tameh. And that is in Rabotai Mishnah Yud. Mishnah Yud Aleph now continues. Now that we quoted a machloket about food bought with Maaser Sheni money, the Mishnah now is going to cite three machlokot, three disputes concerning an animal bought with Maaser Sheni money. The first machloket, the Mishnah says, Tzvi shelakecho bechesed maaser umet. If a deer was bought with Maaser Sheni money and it died, yikaver al yedei oro. It must be buried together with its hide, because since the deer died without being properly slaughtered, it is forbidden to be eaten and it is only suitable to be fed to dogs. Since we have a principle that sacred items like meat bought with Maaser Sheni money may not be redeemed if they will then be fed to animals, the carcass of the deer may not be redeemed, but it must be buried. And the Mefarshim explain the animal's meat and its hide have Maaser Sheni sanctity. Since the meat may not be eaten or redeemed, it must be buried. The hide also must be buried as well, because the hide of Maaser Sheni animal is permitted for use only after the animal is eaten properly. Since this animal cannot be eaten, its hide will never be permitted for use and it must be buried. Now, although we learned in chapter 1, Mishnah 3, that when a deer is bought with Maaser Sheni funds, its hide does not take on sanctity, that's only when the meat is eaten. When the meat is not eaten, like in the Mishnah's case, our Mishnah's case, the hide does take on sanctity, as explained by the Mefarshim. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Yipadeh, it may be redeemed, because in Rabbi Shimon's opinion, you are allowed to redeem a sacred item, even if it will then be fed to animals, and therefore the carcass may be redeemed. And the Rav says, Ven halacha Rabbi Shimon, the halacha does not follow Rabbi Shimon. The halacha follows the Tana Kama, that it must be buried together with its hide. The second machloket, Likacho chai ushchato v'nitma, if someone bought a deer live and then slaughtered it and its meat became tameh, and Mfarshim explain that this can happen only after it is slaughtered, because the living animal cannot become tameh. It can only become tameh once its meat takes on the status of food, which happens after it's slaughtered, as the Rambam tells us in Ilchot Tumat Ohalim, chapter 2, halacha 6. So again, if someone bought a deer live and then slaughtered it and its meat became tameh, yipadeh, it may be redeemed, since the deer was slaughtered and therefore fit to be eaten when it became tameh. It has the same law as food bought with Maaser Sheni money that became tameh, which may be redeemed. Again, the previous Mishnah brought us a machloket between the Tana Kama and the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. This Mishnah's Tana Kama follows the opinion of the Tana Kama there, that such food may be redeemed. And again, we said that was the halacha. Rabbi Shimon Omer, but Rabbi Shimon says, Yipadeh, I'm sorry. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Yikaver, it must be buried. Again, I looked back at the previous case, just to repeat. If someone bought a deer live and then slaughtered it and its meat became tameh, Tana Kama says Yipadeh, may be redeemed. Rabbi Yossi says Yikaver, it must be buried, because in Rabbi Yossi's opinion, any food bought with Maaser Sheni money that became tameh may not be redeemed, but must be buried. In the previous Mishnah, again, Rabbi Yehuda ruled that food bought with Maaser Sheni funds may not be redeemed in Yerushalayim if it becomes tameh. So, essentially, Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and therefore the meat of this deer may not be redeemed. But the Mefarshim explain, in this particular case, Rabbi Yehuda actually disagrees with Rabbi Yossi and holds like the Tana Kama of our Mishnah. Interesting enough, because the Mefarshim explain, this is because Rabbi Yehuda holds, based on his interpretation of a pasuk in the Torah, that when Maaser Sheni money is spent on a live animal, its meat may always be redeemed. So it comes out, there are three opinions regarding food purchased with Maaser Sheni money, which became tameh. Opinion number one, the Chachamim hold that in all cases the food may be redeemed. Opinion number two, Rabbi Yehuda holds that all food must be buried, with the exception of meat from an animal bought live, because if a live animal was bought, slaughtered, and then became tameh, its meat may be redeemed according to Rabbi Yehuda. And according to Rabbi Yossi, third opinion, in all cases the tameh food must be buried. And the final dispute of the Mishnah quotes, Likacho shachut v'nitma, if someone bought a deer that was already slaughtered and its meat then became tameh, hareu kechiperot, It is like any produce or food bought with Maaser Sheni money, which again is subject to the machlok in the previous Mishnah. According to the Chachamim, it may be redeemed. According to Rabbi Yehuda, must be buried, because since he bought the deer after it was slaughtered, it's simply considered meat and would be treated like any other food. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.